To everyone who's here for the first time, including Jacques, welcome. To everyone else, welcome back. This is the 15th Coffee with EMBL, which is in itself a quite remarkable achievement, I think. And we're really looking forward to an exciting discussion this afternoon with the set of speakers we've lined up. And our topic is not different from, but moving on from simply focusing on the pandemic. And here we're going to focus today for one of the most important things I think we can be discussing, the environment. And we're actually celebrating World Environment Day, the recent World Environment Day. Just before we get started, I would also like to take a few moments out to remember some of our colleagues who are no longer with us from the EMBL community. And that's going to start off with a reminder to many of you of someone who I think will be immediately recognizable.
Yes, voters, of course, voters, sure, voters. Yes, okay, don't worry, voters. Yes, yes. Fax and a phone call from Heidelberg inside and out. Jeeves, I need a drink and a cigar.
Okay, I think many of us will be looking at that short video of John Two's and recognizing exactly the character we all knew and loved, at least most of the time when we were at EMBL. John was in my time at the EMBL, John was such a central figure. He was transiently Director General in between Lennart and Fotis coming in. He ran the EMBL Journal, of course, and was a key figure in building up the European Molecular Biology Organization, and was in many ways also an inspirational figure who also did great science and was just an integral part of the community. So it's with a lot of fond memories and sadness that we note John's passing. But I would also like to take a few moments to acknowledge that we have also lost from the community a number of other prominent alumni, including Jules Hendricks, Katja Bruckner, Jean-Francois Bierblock, who I also remember very well, and Kevin Lennart, who, of course, I also remember well. And I think all our thoughts are with them and their families and their closest associates. So thank you for joining me in just a few moments reflection on some of the friends and members of the EMBL family who have moved on. So today we are going to focus on discussing the climate, the environment, and also relevance. I think that's a really important thing, and the challenge to all of us to make ourselves relevant, to be inspired by some of the great scientific figures of the past who have not only been outstanding scientists, but who have gone on to contribute fundamentally to improving and meeting the challenges of the societies they lived in. And I think that's something that we should be thinking seriously about. And we're going to hear about that today and look into some of these issues. I think it's interesting that we're having this coffee with EMBL immediately after the conclusion of the most recent G7 summit. Now, this was controversial, as they always are, in the conclusions perhaps didn't go as far as we wanted them to go. The action points agreed not as far as we wanted them to go. And it would be really interesting to hear people's comments and thoughts about this. One quote that came out of the G7 summit that I think is really helpful for setting up our discussion today is the quote that we are all in the same storm, even if we aren't all in the same boat. And that is, I think, a really nice way of reminding us all we may be in different geographical areas in the world, but sooner or later, we're all facing the same challenges. And it's one that I think we can have a big positive impact on helping with. And we really need to find a path to see how that can succeed. So what we're wanting to explore today is what can and should the EMBL community do? So that's obviously the staff members at EMBL at the moment, but also us as alumni and as a network. What should we do collectively to address these challenges and issues? How do we prioritize our action to generate the biggest impact at any level? And can we combine global and local efforts more effectively? So those are some of the topics we wanted to explore, and we welcome your opinions, thoughts, and comments. And to start things off, I would like to introduce our first contributor. It's a great honor to welcome back one of the most famous of our alumni association, Jacques Dubochet. I think everyone knows Jacques, but I invite him to introduce himself and remind us of his time at EMBL.
Okay, yes, I was at EMBL in 1978 for 9 years. It was the greatest time of my life. And we, in our group, we make a discovery that means that water can be vitrified, which was a complete surprise. And of course, for a scientist, finding something that you don't expect and nobody expects is the greatest gift that you can get. It took 35 more years until cryo-EM became what it is. And in the meantime, I got a Nobel Prize. Now, you get a Nobel Prize. Well, I was always politically active. At the EMBL, for example, I was for a time president of the Staff Association and so forth, so forth. And imagine you get the Nobel Prize on the 4th of October, and then the 10th of December, you have to speak in front of all the world. And what are you? And I thought, I'm not going to speak only about cold water. And these 2.5 months were very tense months. And in Stockholm, I spoke about cold water and much more about responsibility of the scientist and about knowledge, and expressing the idea that knowledge must be a public good, and especially about medicine and any medical device. They should all belong to the World Health Organization, derived organism, and the World Health Organization should make the best of all our knowledge about medicine and, in fact, about everything for the health. And voila, this is a good time to remember that. And the discussion we have on the virus. Okay, soon after that, and so, I felt very strongly that, with the Nobel Prize, you get a voice. And in fact, I felt strongly that this voice had to be used. And soon I became, it happens that a small group of young people with whom I was in contact, make a big impression on me. They were in December 2018, they were at Katowice at the World Conference about climate, and where they were just going there as young people, as teenagers, to see what are they doing there. Are they moving, those people? And there they met Greta Thunberg, and when they come back, they were completely enthusiastic, and they brought me with them in this movement, and things went on. They became very active. I was also in all this manifestation, and I was a little bit their hero, which was quite funny. And voila. Then, in August 1889, there was a great meeting of the European climate strike in Lausanne. Greta Thunberg came, father also, and came a little bit in contact. And I'm fully involved with these kind of things. And then came the virus, and everything went closed. And last year in October, a group of these young people, which were close to them, and they decide we have to do something. We can't just stop because of this virus. So they noticed that there is the biggest CO2 producer in our canton is the concrete factory, 8% of the CO2 of the canton. And this factory was eating up one of a beautiful hill, which was known as from European importance in terms of vegetation and in terms of history about Celtic history. And so they came on this plateau and they installed what they call ZAD, Zone à Défendre. Was an old house. They used this house, and they came to this beautiful region and stopped any kind of movement of the factory towards in this direction. And it lasted for 5 months. After 5 months, there were 150 there, and 650 police people came, and this was the end. And and I was involved with that because they wanted all to be anonymous. They didn't want to give their name for reason we know, and who could defend them legally, so that we organized a committee to support them, and I was the president of this committee, and we spent a lot of time trying to discuss with them and convincing them. My main goal was convincing them to be non-violent, because in this group there were strong interaction with, for example, German groups, French groups, which were used to fight with the police, and they have a culture of fighting, and we were trying to convince them, don't do that, it doesn't help. So at the end, it went quite well, and so far, and it continues now. And this is my life, and I spend all my time with this kind of things. And it's very, of course, in the meantime, I must say that I wonder, is it serious, this story of climate crisis? Are you sure it is serious? You know that in my place, we had the temperature of -15 this summer, this winter. Now, now we are at more than 30, that more than 55 degree difference. What do we mean for this poor 1 degree? Are you sure that this 1 degree is important? Are you able to convince the other one that it is important, it is vital? Are you? If you are not, you should better work on that. So that's what we do with the colleague from Zurich. We worked hard on the data, and we noticed that truly the temperature is rising exponentially. IPCC doesn't speak frequently about exponential. They don't like that. It's too horrible, exponential. And by the way, CO2 increase and exponential temperature increase with doubling time of 30 years. That's short, exactly the same exponential curve that for CO2. And by the way, exactly the same curve, 30 years doubling time for the consumption of fossil fuel. So that's clear. It's vital for us. It's vital. If it's continue like that, the curve is my children, my grandchildren will have no support. And it's vital. It's just vital. Our society, if we continue like that, our society collapse. I'm never sure. I'm a scientist. I don't know the future. But you see, in life, we have to make political decision. And political decision, in most cases, decision, who I'm going to marry, where I'm going to put my little bit of money. We make decision with far less strong data. And we make decision, and here we have to make a decision. Okay, well, that's all. That's what I have to say.
Thank you very much, Jacques. So that was an inspirational call to arms, I think, for all of us as scientists. I want to sincerely thank you for that. You also touched upon a whole range of issues that we've explored in previous discussions and we would like to unpack and talk about today. If I may, you mentioned that meeting Greta Thunberg and her involvement. Now, I think we all have to recognize that she has inspired her generation to take climate change seriously, even if my generation and many other people here haven't done as much as we should have done. How do you, I mean, Greta Thunberg is often quoted as saying, we have to be guided by the science, to her credit. And yet I worry that many of her generation who are activists actually see us as scientists as part of the problem and not part of the solution. How do you think we can be inspired by the lessons of past scientists, and how can we transform that to become part of the solution, not part of the problem?
I can tell you that on the ZAD and the friends I have there, these young people, I don't know all of them, of course, but those I know, I can tell you take science seriously. And yes, they not only they take science seriously, but they work on it very seriously, and they are competent. These are really people who are capable of what I told you before, of explaining why they do believe what they do in a convincing way, some very convincing way.
Yeah, I think there is a danger. Also, as molecular biologists, that we're seen to be doing things that are not addressing the problems of the environment or climate change. And you also mentioned, I think in a very graphical way, how do you get people to, including politicians, to believe you that a 1 degree temperature change is happening and that it's significant and that there's a correlation between the data that you're seeing and the future trajectory of change? Because many of these concepts in the relation with data are not simple. You know, some days it's really warm and you say, what's the problem? Or the winter's very cold and you say, okay, we need a bit of climate change. We want the weather to be nicer. I live in a place where people are always asking for the temperature to be warmer than it actually is. How do we deal with that? Is it a question of trying to educate the public more, or is it our job to engage more with the public, to explain carefully what these things mean?
Of course, I don't know. And I would so much like to know. And I try to think about that with you. It is frequently said that we don't need to convince. We have to bring the emotion. And I don't like that. People are not stupid. And people can understand. And I don't know how to bring the emotion. Well, you see, I speak quite emotionally.
Yeah, you do. I think you're doing a good job at the moment.
But no, and you see my story with the exponential. Now, that's my favorite discussion with those who don't believe. And I think that if we can bring the people to stop a moment and listen, then we convince them a little bit. Oh, I don't know. People are strange. You see, in Switzerland last Sunday, it was a law on CO2, which would be minimal progress toward the use of CO2, and it was refused. But that's because but why? Because we have seen in the news and in the media coming during the last months enormous strength of the lobbies, and the lobbies had an infinite finance money, and we lost the thing because other people who has much more money came to convince people that it's just a matter of money, a badly used money.
So let me just pass on a question that's coming in from the the audience, how do we lead by example as scientists? And how do we replicate what Greta Thunberg has been able to do and inspire enough people in positions of influence to actually bring about change?
I don't know. I try my little best, but I have the impression. You see, I was in the Conseil Communal in the political direction of the city, and I quit some months ago because I had the impression it was useless. I gave my talk, told what I had to say, but it's enough. It's enough. People knows it, and when they don't want to hear about it, but they will come. They will come to it because facts are hard, and you can't avoid them eternally.
Yeah, I mean, as scientists, we always like to think that in the end, in any scientific debate, truth wins, right? I mean, we like to believe that. The trouble is, by the time truth has won, it may be too late for the environment. And there's sort of a paradox here, or an enigma, that at a stage of our society and technology where there has never been more access to communication through so many different channels, it seems that rather than that enlightening the population, it's just confused them. It's just led to too many conflicting, confusing messages at political, economic levels. And as you say, a lot of people with a lot of money have a vested interest in the short term and things not changing. I guess people are more afraid of economic and societal change than climate change. So I guess that's one of the big challenges we need to embrace, how to communicate more effectively, not to frighten people exactly, but to help them to understand the importance of why change is in their own interest. And it may be difficult or painful in the short term, but it's important. And I think we have to fight a war with facts, which is difficult. But EMBL, Jacques, you were involved with from its very early stages. You saw EMBL grow from a much smaller organization to the fantastic, large organization that it is today. But certainly when I worked there, many of us, we've always been inspired by its example of driving science in the right way, of creating a culture where people are able to do difficult things, to innovate, take risks, and ask difficult questions. How can EMBL contribute to this problem, or the solution to the problem, I should say?
This, but I want to come back to another point you mentioned. I think that those people here on the screen and around it, are a kind of scientist. And in some way, because those at least we have done our job. At least those of the climate, those of the geography of the Earth, of atmosphere, they have done their job. And we know what is the situation. But to the question, why are the people not able to understand what's going on? These are questions for sociologists. And I think they are starting to think about that and to try to understand what are we doing wrong so that we are not able to convince people. I guess that those people who convince Swiss people to vote no to the CO2 law knew quite well what they do. And they have studied very seriously sociology and psychology of common. We need to, in some way, our movement, our kind of science should also grow in this direction so that we, in some way, learn how to convince people that truth, reality is important. You know how many people in the social science continue to believe that reality is a construct.
Well, I think this is a perfect time to bring in one of the iconic leaders of EMBL at the current time, Matthias Hentze, who again is well known to us all. I look on Matthias also as the father of the Alumni Association. And Matthias, the floor is yours.
Well,
to solve all the problems.
Well, thank you, Angus, for a lot of undeserved praise. But leaving that aside for the moment, I think Jacques just asked a very, very interesting question, which is, why are they not able to understand? Why are people not able to understand? And, I'm certainly far from being a sociologist, but I've thought about, that problem. And it has reminded me of, when I was a little boy and my mother asked me to go to bed. And she would say, you have to go to bed now, tomorrow morning, your school starts. If you haven't slept enough, you won't be able to and all of this. And I would come up with all kinds of excuses of why it wasn't necessary to go to bed now and, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the answer to the question is people perhaps deep down inside understand much better than they're willing to admit. In as much as I was, I was willing to admit that probably I do need to sleep enough to go to school the next morning. I simply didn't want to go to bed. And so, I fought, for arguments because I didn't want to live with the consequences. And so I think, it is not the lack of good arguments. It's just a lack of willingness of people to accept the argument, because once you accept an argument, you have much less opportunity to refuse some of the consequences that you should take. And so I think it's that part where, that element of the debate gets difficult. And quite honestly, I feel myself caught in the same dilemma. I do feel that science has convinced us that we need to do something about the environment. And I do, have implemented a number of consequences, in my own life. But I still, drive the car that I drive, and that is not an eco-friendly car. And it's, that is just my way of failing, of being sort of very consequent. I think that's an element of most human beings. So, that being so, I think that, if we look at the corona pandemic, it is actually telling us two things. It is telling us, on the one hand, that there are ways offered by, science, whatever loose definition one might have, that wearing masks and, observing certain behavioral changes definitely helps to keep the pandemic in check. Wearing masks, social distancing, et cetera, et cetera. We all know this and knew this. Yet, just having that knowledge and having full power over ourselves to implement this simply is not enough, because humans are tempted all the time, by their own desires to do things. And so I think that while there is a certain influence of science educating people that they should change their behavior and offering ways of how that can be done effectively, I think because of the weakness of the human mind, that is not enough. And again, continuing to look at the pandemic, there is an additional element of answer in my analysis. And that is, science can help in an additional way. Science can help us recognize the problem, but science can also contribute to finding solutions. And, if we look at the pandemic, if it hadn't been, for fantastic research that has enabled, the generation of a vaccine, within just one calendar year, between knowing the sequence of the virus and having an FDA-approved vaccine at the other end that works greater 90%. That's a miracle. I mean, to me, that is a much bigger achievement in some ways, certainly in terms of impact on humankind, than landing men on the moon has been. And so I think that this is a fantastic example of how investment into research can help find solutions. And so this is where I come from. And when I briefly spoke last year, I introduced, and I won't go back to that, my reasons for initiating what I call the Environmental Research Initiative. And that is strongly inspired by, the EMBL culture that Jacques, you also described so nicely. I think EMBL has a history in empowering young people that have, good ideas, not necessarily mainstream ideas, but recognizing, the great ideas amongst the non-mainstream ideas that everyone could do anywhere, and giving people what they need: collaboration, equipment, budget, support, collegial support, to make these things happen. So my idea that I'm putting into practice is that if, we can combine, this quintessential EMBL culture to look for great ideas and then empower people with great ideas to make them happen, with the finding of solutions to the environmental challenge. And, clearly biology is not the complete answer to the question, but it can be one significant contributor to finding answers to those questions. And so, through this environmental research initiative, as some of you already know, I hope to be able to raise funds to bring group leaders to EMBL to work, making use of all the powerful molecular research at EMBL and working on finding solutions, but taking small steps. Last year, and now I'm transitioning to Melissa, it was possible to, just find 63,000 euros as a start. That doesn't sound like much money in terms of, either the dimension of the problem to be tackled, nor ultimate need. But I was impressed by when we then started to call at EMBL for so-called catalyst projects, how the EMBL community suggested catalyst projects that had budgets between 10 and 30,000 euros per project, that should address a fundamental element that has a recognizable kernel of being able to initiate a solution finding. And so with this 63K, we could fund 3 catalyst projects. And rather than me introducing them, it's so much better to have them introduced by those who actually proposed them and who are actually working on them. And, Melissa, why don't you start?
Just before we start, Melissa, that's fantastic. I just wanted to take a second to thank Matthias for what he's done on this initiative. I think you don't get enough thanks for it, and I think it's inspirational what you've done. And large oak trees grow from small acorns. So I think the scale isn't the issue. The direction is the issue, and I think that's exactly the example that we need in this direction. And just one quick thing to ask you before Melissa goes on to exemplify how this is developed. I think I couldn't agree with you more about what a fantastic example it was to the world of the importance of science to get us out of difficult situations. They shouldn't rely on science to always save the skin of society, and finding magical solutions. But I think we must be really focused on communicating that wonder, really. As you said, it's comparable to landing men on the moon. You know, when a global pandemic arose, millions of lives have been saved by rolling out this vaccine with unprecedented speed. And I think that should be an inspiration to what we can achieve together if you harness resources. And the other element of that is Isaac Newton, of course, is one of his famous statements was, if I have seen further, it's because I stood on the shoulders of giants. And the people who were able to roll out the vaccine in such a short time were able to achieve it not only by their brilliance and hard work, but by standing on the shoulder of all the brilliant basic scientists who created the technologies and the RNA biology and the understanding that they could build on. And I think these are critical messages that perhaps we can pick up and discuss later. Apologies for interrupting. I just felt that was such an important point you'd made that we should, thank you for your contributions. And please, Melissa, carry on.
Melissa, if you would allow, I would just love to take 30 seconds. I just saw in the chat, a very pertinent point made by Lucia, who is asking, but is it really a good idea to trust the fate of the planet on science and technology that has not been developed? That alerts me that perhaps an aspect of what I said could be misunderstood. So I'm not advocating to just continue your lives as you do and enjoy, science will solve it for you. What I'm advocating is we all need to change our behaviors, but that will, unfortunately, in my opinion, not be enough. And so in addition, we must empower science and give it everything we can to find additional better solutions. So sorry for the interruption, Melissa.
Okay, thanks. So I'm happy to be here and to introduce you to our little baby project that was funded from this ERI project, which we're all excited about. And Stefano and Dima should be in the audience and might be joining. So our project that's being funded, we're trying to look at nanoplastics. So these are the smallest plastics that are so far discovered. So we have the plastics in the ocean, they break down to microplastics and then further down into nanoplastics. And we're using our specialized X-ray technology to try to understand more about these plastics and actually to find out the harm that they might be generating out in the ocean. But I want to go back a step and explain how we actually came onto this idea of starting this research. And it was with a visit with the Terra Schroner that came to Hamburg. So they had this big microplastic funding project. They were going through 9 big rivers in Europe and collecting samples. And when it was here in Hamburg, Edith and upper management arranged that we were able to visit from Hamburg and go to the Schroner with our families. So me and my kids went, and my kids were super excited to see the research ship. And my little 4-year-old got huge eyes and kept on saying, "Oh, you do plastic research." And I'm like, "No, I look at antibodies. They're cool too." And she's like, "But why don't you do plastic?" And they're like, "Well, I'm a biologist. I do antibodies." And then, but this phrase actually stayed in my head for quite some long time. And I was like, so why don't we do plastic? It's because this is how I was educated. This is the training I went through, that we look at the macromolecules and how they interact. And that's what we're trying to understand. But why can't we do soft matter? Or why can't we actually go outside our bubble and see if the technologies and the stuff that we've become experts, if we can't translate this to other projects? So I started doing the research and finding if our technology is actually applied for studying plastics, and realized that it would fit pretty well. And then I first realized how little is known about these nanoplastics. And we hear in the news, it's always this big, microplastics in the rain, microplastic in the Antarctica. And then I just realized how little is known, and that it's actually not only good to switch and try our research onto this new material, but also it's timely really important to do it. So I reached out to the colleagues in my group, and we started brainstorming. And that's the exciting thing about EMBL, that we have the physicists, the chemists, the mathematicians. Everybody came at a table, and we started brainstorming ideas. And within half an hour, we had this huge long list of collecting water from the washing machine and using tea bags. And we had all these great ideas where we can actually go start looking for the nanoplastics. Then the pandemic happened, so we weren't able to measure our tea bags as soon as we had hoped to. But then the call for the ERI funding came, and that was a great start to get us motivated and back onto the table, and actually to come up with a concrete idea about what we want to look at. And I think I'll hand over to Dima, who was going to then say, what's the dangers?
Just before handing over, can I ask you a question on behalf of the community and perhaps a question that some other younger scientists might be thinking of as well? This is, again, great. Congratulations. That's fantastic about doing this. Did it ever concern you that by doing that, you may move down a route of spending your time doing really important things that may historically be judged as the most important, but when you come to write your Nature paper, won't get published in Nature, so then you don't get your next job, so then you don't get your next grant, and EMBL, says, okay, that's not what we want. We want. How do we fit together this change in what's important and essential for us to do without it disrupting the career trajectories? Do you understand what I'm asking? How do we deal with that problem?
But I think that's one of the positive outcomes, if you can say positive outcome from the pandemic. But one of the things we learned through the pandemic is that the reason the vaccination got on the market so fast is because there wasn't the linear system how it used to be. And it was in parallel, and everybody was out there doing their stuff. The preprints have come up. People have been publishing their data and sharing the data. So I think that helped me to not like, I have this great idea, I should hide it, and I should write a huge ERC grant. But no, we should take it out there, and we should talk about it to people, because just by actually finding the dialogue, we can actually all work together. So yes, it might not help me with my antibodies that I hope to look at, but it will help me. I mean, I think it's been amazing to see just by talking about it and being invited to these kind of discussions. We have people reached out who said, well, we do this lung research and we find plastic in the lungs. Can we actually use your technology? And somebody reached out, an uncle from one of our colleagues who was at a family gathering. He was talking about the plastics, like, we have these ceramics and they can use for filtering. Maybe we can get together and find out some ways. So I think this is what we should take out from the pandemic, is not linear thinking. We should actually try to spread out. If we can tackle.
Agree. I was just trying to highlight, I think there's a broader problem for us in the scientific community of enabling this work to go ahead by changing perceptions of what's important and what's fundamental. Sorry, Dima, please come in there.
Thanks for inviting. Yeah, I will be brief. Just wanted to add also to what Melissa said, that microplastic became kind of common words. Everybody knows about it. A lot of research and nanoplastics. Only recently was shown that it's the amount of nanoplastic in oceans is underestimated. Actually, it's really a lot of nanoplastic in ocean, and it's like, from common sense, it's more dangerous than microplastic because of this its size. It can go into like living organism inside the cell, and it is not very well known how toxic the nanoplastic by itself. Probably it is toxic, but as I said, not much known about it. But apart from that, the nanoplastics they are very small, so they have very high ratio of set surface to its volume, and they are very prone to bind with chemicals which are like toxic and dangerous, and just serve as carriers for the toxic chemicals. And plus, what we are also doing, and I think it's very important, this nanoplastic, when it gets inside the human body, it binds with proteins. And it forms kind of corona, of protein surface around these nanoparticles, and it disrupts the secondary structure of proteins. So it's kind of kills proteins, plus it forms some nuclear particles, which is also, it's unknown how toxic it is, how dangerous it is. Probably quite dangerous. And we are lucky because we have very suitable methods for studying this. I think in this sense we are really lucky. So that's it. And probably Stefan also want to say something.
You want to?
Or if you have questions,
Did you want to contribute, Stefano? I think you're muted at the moment. Maybe
Stefano, you're muted.
It might need Peter to unmute you.
I should try now.
Okay, good. Great, thanks.
So coming briefly to Angus' question on whether we worry about the project not being fashionable enough. I mean, we're all on relatively short-term contracts anyway, and if anything, even without eventually ending up on Nature or so, we got a feeling that trying too hard, getting this big shot result is probably the best way not to obtain it. So at this point, it's better to follow the topic that you would think is going to be more interesting for you. I mean, I have a background which is not strictly biological, despite using protein and so on. I find the topic interesting itself regardless. So let's see what it comes out.
Could I just ask, also responding to Fatima's question in the chat, what was the ultimate aim of the project? Was it to understand the true extent of microplastic contamination, or to identify the impact of it, or to come up with a way of perhaps removing the microplastics, or all of the above?
So on the long term, yes, it would be nice to act directly on the environmental ones and find a way to filter them, concentrate them, take them away, maybe recycle them and so on. What is lacking in this nanoplastic area is some standardized method of seeing them. There are a certain number of works which try to go to the lower end of microplastics, and since they happen to be fit to the method we use every day for other reason, we thought, okay, we can probably get something useful out of what we do on this topic.
Okay.
And if I may add, just I think it's really important to establish like the standards, but to show that our method is applicable to characterize nanoplastic, and that's like people can use it to demonstrate. This is a primary goal in my view.
Okay, thank you. And so just following up on the initiative Matthias introduced, can we bring in Michael, who's also, Michael, you're group leader, I think, at EMBL at the moment, and you're now got another project in this initiative studying pesticides. Could you introduce this to us, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do so. And thanks for the introduction, Agnes. Indeed, I'm a group leader here at EMBL Heidelberg, and maybe I can give an example. In fact, we actually got in the lab. We got two catalyst project in the lab. One kind of was assigned kind of to the group, and one was actually really a PhD student who actually came up with the idea. Unfortunately, Amber cannot be here, so I will try to today. So I will try to cover parts of her projects as well. And for me, this is really an example of how, as EMBL, we're kind of we have the EMBL spirit, and as a group leader or as scientists at EMBL, we do have some freedom to do things, and also do things outside of the box, and try things out. And ERI was really a fantastic call to actually do it even more outside of the box than we would usually think, because it's even outside of kind of like the established scientific activity. So what is our established scientific activity in the group? We are actually a microbiome lab, looking experimentally. So we're fascinated by the fact that a human being is more than just human cells, but has actually a lot of microbial cells as well, about the same number. And when you look at the gene, the microbial genes outnumber the human genes by about 100-fold. So each of us is only about 1% human. So maybe we better don't take ourselves too importantly. And so what we actually found in one of our studies, we took 300 clinical drugs, and we were asking a very simple question: are those drugs also metabolized by microbes? And the answer was an overwhelming yes. Actually, 2/3, roughly 200 of the drugs that we tested could be metabolized by gut bacteria. And we then used molecular tools. So we used some cloning and some genetics coupled with analytical sciences, mass spectrometry-based metabolomics, to identify what are the genes and the metabolic pathways involved in this drug pharmaceutical degradation. So that's really kind of like, that's our bread and butter in the lab. But then someone in the last ones asked the question, well, why only the bacteria that are human associated? Bacteria, microbes, they play a very important role, if not the most important role, to also biodegrade chemicals in the environment, such as pesticides, such as endocrine disruptors. And that's really where this ERI was fantastic, because that was even further stimulated the discussion and the brainstorming to ask the question, well, if microbes are important, well, it might be worthwhile to first of all look, what do people already know? And there's already a bunch of knowledge, but it seemed to us that not at the molecular level that we potentially could do with the tools that we do have at EMBL and that we do have in the lab. And that was then really the pitch to say, well, let's replace pharmaceuticals by 1,000 pesticides. Can we get 1,000 pesticides in our hands? And can we get microbes that are important in water systems and in soil, and replace our gut bacteria that we have in our assays by soil bacteria, water bacteria, to then investigate what are the microbes that degrade which pesticides and what are the degradation products. Because quite interestingly, despite the fact that it's generally accepted that microbes in the environment play such a big role in pesticide degradation, we don't know in most cases, which microbes do the job. And we don't know what are the degradation products, which makes it extremely challenging to monitor the degradation of those pesticides in the environment and to follow those up. And not even talking about like doing bioremediation of polluted areas, bringing microbes in that could actually clean up the environment. So that's really the pesticide project. And very closely related that we also, and that's the second project led by Amber Brower, a PhD student in the lab. She's developing computational approaches where she tries to employ machine learning to predict what those degradation products are to better detect them in the environment.
So I think this is, again, congratulations, Michael. I think this is very inspiring, and another great example that if you can inspire, as Matthias has done, really bright people in the science community. I'm a great believer in our scientific community. If you can inspire people to tackle the most important problems and challenges of our society and empower them with the resources to do it, that we can achieve great things. And that's where I think there's a fantastic opportunity for EMBL once again to be a shining light and lead the way in showing that it can be cool and sexy to embrace these problems. And I think looking backwards, in the future, when we look back, people carrying out this work will be seen to have been doing the most important things, as opposed to what sometimes can be seen as more trendy or important at the moment. But then there's also the problem of communicating that clearly at every level, to the government, to the funders, to the public, so they understand. And I'd like to bring in Brendan to say something about some of these challenges about building pathways to communication.
Thank you, Angus. Thank everybody who's spoken before me, and yourself, Jacques, certainly for that really inspirational opening. It kind of messed with my head, having been doing like sustainability for 10 years, and you're kind of getting your day-to-day to then have this very passionate call out again wakens me up and gets my juices going. So thank you for that. I think for me, this is a huge year for climate change with the COP26 conference coming up later this year. And having not come from a scientific background, being new to this area, I'm certainly kind of aware that I know that within the COP26 conference, there'll be lots of politicians and decision makers. There'll be lots of fossil fuel companies. There'll be lots of car companies. There'll be lots of people at that conference talking to each other. And actually, I think fundamental, basic life science, molecular science probably won't be very prominent in that room. And I think that's a problem. And I think that's one of the things that hopefully in my work, we can use EMBL and its reputation to raise the profile of the work that EMBL does within that community of decision makers looking at climate change. It was really fascinating, the talk earlier with Jacques and Matthias about the societal response to this. I've got my own personal views on that. I don't think it's necessarily a coincidence that a lot of the activists are quite young people and also quite old people. The decision makers, the mass of middle-aged people who are in the system and grinding day to day with mortgages, with everything, childcare, etc. It's tough. I look at my mum. My mum is a great person. Her massive priority is her 3 boys, and I talk to her about sustainability and stuff. You have to find things that really connect with her and impact her life and the things that she really cares about. And it's not always the environment, unfortunately. But there are things that we can still do. We can still hook people with a positive kind of story of the great benefits that being sustainable brings. And again, I think that's something that, as I try and communicate going forward, EMBL's place in this fight against climate change, I'm going to keep trying to reinforce is the positive story about sustainability, the benefits it would bring to EMBL and other organizations like EMBL, other research organizations, that being sustainable improves your image, it makes you more efficient and effective, you have a more proud, loyal workforce, etc., etc. There's so many opportunities here about being sustainable. So I think there's some kind of important messages that I would bring. I also know that at the COP conference, and they're talking about things, society is much more aware of the economic impact of climate change, of the social impact of climate change, of the climatic. These are things that society kind of broadly talks about. What's the impact on the molecular world? It's not on the agenda. It's not really being discussed. And I think there's possibly another opportunity there to raise the profile there. And those are some of the things that I'm going to be looking at doing in the near future.
Yeah, I think it's a critical thing for us to find ways to bring science and scientific excellence center stage. Thomas, I'd like to bring in Thomas Vaccari to raise some of these questions with our speakers today. Thomas, are you available?
Yeah. So actually, I mean, it's great to see the EMBL leading on these issues, because as Matthias has remembered us, I mean, the EMBL has an history of leading in this. So there was a couple of aspects that I was curious about, and there were a couple of questions in the chat about it, about the program. I mean, how do you see the program developing, and essentially, what's the next step? And then there was also a specific question that, I guess would be good for Matthias or for Brendan. So whether the program is thought to be opening to outside the EMBL at some point, or how can the community engage with this program if the alumni have ideas or propose collaboration or something like that. I don't know who wants to take the question.
Matthias, can you comment?
I'm certainly most happy to. So I think the first thing to say is EMBL, at least in my mind, is not sort of primarily about rules and policies and so on, but it is about a spirit and a goal and working together towards that goal. And EMBL is also, I think, not closed but very open to others. So while I shared with you that ERI's budget was 63,000. It actually came from the Friends of EMBL, which is a community that people can join. It came from a small donation I made myself when I turned 60, and it came from those who I invited as my birthday party guests, who made donations. So it was kind of a very practical small budget, and it's basically spent, and I'm very happy how it's being used. I think very clearly, the key thing I need to address is, as boring as it may sound, but I need to bring in funds. And I need to bring in funds, and I need help. not just people giving money, that's great, but also people helping me to convince those who, do want to help that here is a fantastic path to help, because every penny, I swear, that passes through this will be used in the most efficient and effective way. Not everything may lead to outcomes. We all know research cannot promise outcomes, but it will be used in a conscientious and well-considered and well-monitored and well-supported way. So clearly, one path is I need to find more money. I think, and the community can help. The second thing is we haven't spoken about industry and the role of industry. We all realize the role of industry as a polluter and as a major, source of some of the problems. And I am not so naive to believe, that industry whose tasking is, to provide shareholder value and what have you, will just kind of, become philanthropic, by some magic of some argument that one can make. But I think they do realize that, they do need to take measures to sort of minimize the damage that they cause. So we are talking to industry, and two examples are, one of the biggest German housing companies. We all know that, housing and living causes environmental problems, and they are engaging with us. And one of the world's biggest cement producers bears the name of Heidelberg in its name. It's Heidelberg Cement. And we're talking to them about joint projects. So this is another potential source of money. And, beyond the money, hopefully, we will be able to collect a budget that is about 1,000 times the number that I mentioned. I said 63,000. We are really aiming to 50 million. Hopefully we get at least somewhere towards that number, not overnight. And then my big hope is, and I know that was one of the questions that was asked, is this limited to EMBL or, will it also be available to the outside? I'd love it to, it would be EMBL spirit, and besides, EMBL is not just the EMBL buildings and institutions. EMBL is all of our member states and the scientific community. So I'd love to find effective ways of connecting. I think maybe I'll finish here, because otherwise I guess it get into a monologue, and I'm sure there's many other interesting thoughts.
That's great, Matthias. Actually, I'd like to ask Freddie to come in. He just made an excellent, I think a very interesting comment in the chat. If Freddie's willing to share that with us, I think it raises a very relevant point. Hi, Freddie. Can you be unmuted? Can you? Yes.
No, I'm allowed. Okay, thanks. No, I like the discussion as always. And I just think, the big point we were tending to as humans, and Matthias made a very nice introduction as a fellow non-sociologist about humans, is that we try to point a finger to other people. But couldn't we just commit ourselves as a community to just start, stopping air travel and stop to go to conferences in some sensible manner, right? I mean, and that would be probably a way that could be very easily been achieved. And, frankly, if I look at the conferences I've been to in the last 10 years, it would have not changed my life if I would have only been at 7 out of 10 of them, right?
So how can, I really like that idea. If you could guarantee that the money thereby saved could be recycled into other projects, my concern, Freddie, would be I'm already worried that in the reckoning after the spend on the global pandemic, the governments will just cut funding to scientists.
Absolutely.
What you will do is just give them a reason not to give us grants or cut the amount of grants and say, well, you don't need this travel budget. But I think it's a very interesting point. And I think the idea of changing, all of us changing our way of doing things just because we always did them that way, and thinking again about what could we do that doesn't damage things that are important, but maybe helps move things in a different direction. I mean, Jacques, I mean, maybe we could bring you again. I'm interested to know what you think of the discussion you've been hearing and how you feel we can bring science center stage, and how can we excite the politicians to pay attention to what's being done and ultimately help Matthias and EMBL and the community to get the funding that's needed to inspire these fantastic projects, including the ones we've been hearing about already going on at EMBL to study microplastics and pesticide metabolism. Can you?
Yes, thank you for calling me again. You see, I have there are two persons I admire especially. One is this schoolgirl, 15 years old, who said, no, it can't continue like that. And she decided, no, I will not allow that. I will use all my strength to change this. Another guy is, do you know Aurélien Barraud? None of you knows him. Whoa! Strange. He's astrophysicist from Grenoble. He's a famous professor. His specialty is black holes. Voila. And when the Minister of Environment of France decides to leave because he thinks he can't do what he had to do, Aurélien Barraud came out and said, no, it's not possible like that. And since that time, he's fighting all his strength to change the situation. And in some way, I did the same. And I call that our coming out. We need to come out. We are facing a deadly situation. All of you, it's not a matter of gaining a few thousand of million. The world should change. You see, the president of the United States is coming with a budget of more than 1,000 billions. That's what we need. And we have that money. So that's the kind of thing. And, well, I would imagine, you see, all the people of EMBL, all the world with all the alumni coming out, the coming out of all these scientists all over the world, this would have a big impression. And all those people saying, no, I don't mind about whatever my next million. I need my world being saved. That's another view. Ale, go ahead.
I really hope you're getting this recorded, because I want to make sure that we use these vignettes of Jacques' passionate comments here. Brendan, you've put your hand up. Would you like to comment?
Yeah, just really following up actually what Freddie has said. So one of the things I'm doing, obviously, is trying to make EMBL just a more sustainable organization in operation. There's a strategy in place. It hasn't been fully adopted yet, so I can't give you the agreed target, but certainly we are looking at getting the organization to put a limit on the carbon emissions from our travel, which is actually more ambitious than what you suggested, Freddie. So it's a shame we have to do that. It really is. I don't like putting targets and stopping. I'd rather work with people. But I get what Jacques says, and there really is no choice sometimes. And also with the science community, from where else I've worked, scientists have more autonomy and therefore more responsibility than lots of other professions, because within your groups and your laboratories, you can spend your grant money and stuff kind of as you want. It's more difficult to put kind of hard behavior policies in place than it is in other sectors. So one thing I want to say is the scientific world does have a massive footprint. It travels a lot. It uses lots of plastic. It's very energy intense. And scientists And there are lots of really great young scientists. There's lots of EMBL as well, who are, as Jacques saying, no, we want to change this, but it's a big system to change. The scientific world is a big system. And with travel, people are concerned that it's not that they are going to miss the travel themselves. They're concerned about the perception that that's going to have of other scientists, and that they're going to have less visibility at conferences, etc. So we need to start with these passionate young scientists and start to change. But it's a big beast to change, and it has to get to the point that scientists don't ever feel that they have to be in person at conferences to get the credibility that they want to get.
Yeah, I think even beyond that, I feel guilty about what I'm just about to say, because I feel I'm almost like betraying my own community. But just as one example, I think following the clarion call from Jacques, that we need to change much more fundamentally, and also more than just cutting back on air travel. I took part this week in a big scientific evaluation, quinquennial evaluation, sort of tenure review, not in EMBL, but at one of Europe's best funded and most fabulous, productive scientific environments. And yet, when I look back at what was being discussed there, which was all excellent science, and I'm 100% supportive of it, but I can't help feeling there's a danger it's missing the point, because there's a real danger that we spend too much time also in the elite institutes focusing on saying, look how well we've done, look how many papers we've published, look at the impact factor of this, without ever discussing the impact factor for how that's addressing some of the big problems of the day. Now, I do worry about that, because I completely understand and advocate the importance of basic science that's not linked in a linear fashion to an application. But nonetheless, I think it is actually very important that we do really keep our eye on addressing this issue of the relevance of what we're doing, and how we can rise, like Louis Pasteur, to meet the challenges of the day, to be great basic scientists, but to be relevant to our society. So with due apologies to all my colleagues who feel offended by that remark, it's the dilemma I think we have of how we balance those conflicting desires to focus on supporting basic science and excellence, and yet also make ourselves relevant. Thomas, again, maybe you could come back here. I think you made the point excellently in the chat of saying, how do we translate the fact that it wasn't just the pandemic that was an emergency, but the climate and the environment is also an emergency?
Yeah. So, and one thought that I had, reflecting on what also Melissa was mentioning before, is that somehow the pandemic changed also one attitude to science, which is that of really going into a topic, and you have the need to specialize in yourself, but not really moving much aside. And we have seen with the pandemic a big shift in a lot of groups to really, catch the immediacy of the problems and jumping into the topic of the virus. I think, there's something to be said probably in providing, ways for, with the tools or with the knowledge that could be relevant to jump from side to side much more flexibly into something that is very topical. And I applaud the EMBL initiative in that, because somehow this is a little bit of a seed of that, to try to say, okay, we have the technology for something, let's enable some scientists to, not worry about the publication, but jump into a different, a different question. So I think this has to be done more flexibly, so that people can really, together with probably getting an increased sense of urgency globally for these things, that people can be free to test the new solutions in a more flexible way. So that is something. Yeah.
So I think this is also a segue, perhaps, to what we've been spending a lot of time discussing is how can we help from the Alumni Association and this community. And, just to remind people, we are actively exploring and thinking about ways to build communication with the public, to build ways of exploring these important topics in a fact-based fashion, perhaps through a YouTube channel. And we are very much wanting to encourage as many people to help us with this initiative, to engage more with the public. I see Nusha's got her hand up, so I'd like to ask her to contribute.
I just wanted to share some of the statements that have been coming in directly to me. One was, could we ask the alumni network who actually will cut down in CO2 emissions? I was also thinking if for 1 year, the number of travel that alumni give up, and I agree, you can't give up all flights, but some of it potentially could all be put towards one area project that's sponsored by the alumni. That could be one thing. A second was a statement, a conference, engaging public voices to change opinion. And this was Carol who mentioned David Attenborough, who we have also been discussing at EMBL, when to bring in David Attenborough to actually have a discussion with the community to do more. And practical changes in labs. Yeah, loads of great ideas. We'll put these on the chat, even if they're coming directly to me.
Fabulous. So, I mean, again, that's an open invitation to everybody who joined these discussions to work with us and help find ways of engaging as much as we can. I think we have to help drive a fact-based understanding of reality. Jacques, you talked about some of these issues and the importance of having people understand what reality is, so the politicians can't run away from it. And there's a lot of money behind people who want to spread disinformation for their own short-term gains. That's one of our challenges. Would you like to add anything else, Jacques, as we come towards the conclusion of our session today?
Well, I don't have something special to say. I think it was quite clear.
And Matthias, again, I think it's inspiring to see EMBL embracing some of these challenges in its own work. Is there anything else you would like to share with us in the alumni community about your future plans?
Yeah, maybe I'd like to say, I'm absolutely hearing and fully supporting, Jacques' call. That's been amplified by many who are on this call. It's totally on target, and it should be heard by everyone, 100%. There was one statement that I saw in the chat that says, these little projects and 50 million that's whistling in the wind compared to the dimension of the problem. And quite honestly, I totally disagree. And I again use the corona example to support my statement. Since yesterday, we know that not only are there two RNA vaccines that work, Moderna and BioNTech, but there is also one RNA vaccine that has received as much money and what have you that doesn't work, and that's CureVac. And the difference between CureVac on the one hand and Moderna and BioNTech on the other is that CureVac does not use modified RNA because which BioNTech and Moderna do. So this modification of RNA is critical to the success of the vaccine. That is the work of one person, Kati Karikó, who, by the way, has a very interesting CV of her own as a woman kind of fighting to be able to just do a little bit of research. She probably spent, less than $1 million, I would imagine, on her own research. That makes the critical difference now between a successful and a non-successful vaccine. So my pledge to the alumni community is, in addition to joining Jacques' call, that we all need to change our lifestyles and recognize that everyone has to play a role individually and as institutions, to also amplify the call that we need to support science in order to look for solutions. or to end again with a reference to the pandemic, let's wear masks, i.e. change our behaviors, but let's also work on the vaccine, i.e. support science. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthias. I think we just heard a commitment from Matthias to stop driving his gas-guzzling Mercedes.
Yeah.
And move to an electric car. Some of us have already done, Matthias.
Bravo, Angus. I know you do.
That's fantastic. I think this is a really exciting point. I made a comment earlier about how one of my great scientific heroes, as for many other people, was Louis Pasteur, and how he was an inspiration. I almost think of this as Project Pasteur, to get back to doing excellent basic science, as we've heard about in some of the presentations today, but use the skills and expertise to embrace the most important problems and do the best exciting science, as you exemplified, Matthias, in coming up with cracking the way to deliver RNA vaccines that have been transformational. And that was one of the really exciting things that has come out, and a great reminder that the people with the most resources aren't always the ones who come up with the greatest ideas. I mean, Einstein in the end was a patent clerk in Switzerland when he, I think, did some of his seminal original work on relativity. And so, again, you don't have to have the biggest groups, but we need to empower people to think outside the box. And I do think we need a sea shift in how we think about how we fund science, how we reward it, and what we take as the most important things to do, so that we're not just always focused in making science like a sporting competition to bring up the superstar scientists, but rather think of it as a community that's tied to the community that fund us, and it is part of a bigger mission to use our opportunities and our powers for the good of our communities. That sounds a bit like too much on my part, but
if I can add one thing, I mean, this goes back to the very beginning, because Angus opened with we're all on the same under the same storm, but in a very different ships. And so, I mean, again, the challenge is definitely global, but the solution are very local, specific, and precise, like Matthias was pointing out. So we really have to have the ability to identify the few things that we can act on locally that might change dramatically things down the line. So yeah, we can also start small as long as we are, very effective in doing things.
Yeah, an avalanche starts with one little pebble at the top of the hill going down. So we need to start an avalanche from the Alumni Association, and all of us, we want to call on all of you to help in this initiative as a community, because we are a community, and I think that by acting as one, that's how we'll deliver real change. I've really enjoyed today. It was inspirational hearing from you, Jacques, and from you, Matthias, and congratulations again to both of you, and thank you for all the efforts that you're doing. I'd just like to conclude again by thanking all of the speakers today for taking part and for inspiring us with their examples and their thoughts, and for the great discussion that we've had. I feel very proud to be part of this community, and I really look forward to the next meeting we have and to what we may be able to achieve together going forward. Thanks, everyone.